The Interview with a Friend by J.R. Adams. I had just finished the difficult task of dropping my mother off at the nursing home. It wasn't a place she had chosen for herself, but circumstances had made the decision for her. The nursing home was nestled in the countryside, surrounded by rolling hills and sheltered beneath a canopy of trees. It was the kind of place that seemed like it should be a retreat, a peaceful sanctuary where one could find solace. After helping her settle in, I made my way back to the car, promising to return the following weekend to check in on her and see how she was adjusting. As I walked down the hallway, just before reaching the elevator, I heard a delicate clinking of a spoon against a teacup. It was a sound that pulled at my curiosity, so I glanced into the room it was coming from. Inside, an older gentleman sat at a small table. He was engaged in what appeared to be a lively conversation, though he was the only one in the room. 2 teacups sat on the table, one in front of him and another across from him, both filled with steaming tea. He spoke animatedly, his eyes alight with a warmth that belied his age. For a moment I hesitated, wondering if perhaps someone was standing in the part of the room I couldn't see, just out of my line of sight. Not wanting to intrude, I continued on my way, chalking it up to the idiosyncrasies of old age. The next weekend, when I returned to visit my mother, I passed by the same room. This time, the door was wide open, revealing an empty space. All the furniture was gone, the room stripped bare, as if the gentleman had never been there at all. I guessed that he must have passed away shortly after I saw him. The thought saddened me, but I brushed it aside as I made my way to my mother's room. To my relief, my mother seemed to be adjusting well. She was sitting by the window, the soft afternoon light casting a gentle glow over her as she smiled at me. We talked for a while, catching up on small things. Then, out of nowhere, she mentioned that she had made a new friend. "There's always someone to talk to here," she said, her voice light and content. "You know, I even see my old imaginary friend from when I was a child. Isn't that funny?" Her words took me by surprise. It was strange to hear her talk about imaginary friends as if they were real. But I didn't want to dampen her spirits, so I just smiled and nodded, letting her continue. As she talked, I couldn't help but feel a twinge of unease. She described her friend with such vivid detail, how they would sit together, sharing stories from her past, laughing about memories that only she could recall. She seemed so happy, almost as if she were reconnecting with a part of herself long forgotten. I visited weekly for some time, but then weeks turned into months, which turned into calls every month and heartfelt letters, and eventually only a few visits a year. My biggest regret is not finding enough time for my mother. A change in my mother was happening, maybe because I had stopped coming as often as I used to. She seemed more at peace, yet there was a wistfulness about her. I pushed back tears. It felt as if she was beginning to say her goodbyes in small, quiet ways. She spoke more and more about her friend and less about the world outside the nursing home. It was as if she was slowly detaching from the life she had lived, finding comfort in the presence of someone or something that only she could see. One afternoon, after finishing up our tradition of eating biscotti, a type of cookie my mom learned to make after falling in love with it in an Italian coffee shop during one of her travels, she declared, "It's far better than coffee cake." I remember the first time she said this, she suddenly slipped into an exaggerated British accent, proclaiming, "What's this, then? A biscuit with your coffee, governor?" It made absolutely no sense, especially considering we were talking about an Italian treat. But that only made us laugh harder. It didn't have to make sense. It was just one of those silly, perfect moments. As we sipped our cups of coffee, we talked. She would ask me about my life, how things had been, if I had ever gotten remarried. I always remembered her smile when she asked that, partially teasing, partially hoping that I wouldn't be alone. I knew she regretted never remarrying after my dad passed in his early 50s. I was about to leave when she reached out and held my hand. "You know," she said softly, "I'm not afraid anymore. My friend is here with me. They've been with me my whole life, just waiting for the right time to come back. I'm not alone anymore." I felt bad that I didn't see her as often as I should have, and I really didn't know how to respond besides a soft smile. Her words hung in the air between us, heavy with a meaning I didn't grasp at that time. I squeezed her hand and told her, "I love you, Mom." But as I walked away, I couldn't shake the feeling that something more was happening, something beyond my understanding. I made a pact with myself to come and see her every weekend I could spare. The next week when I arrived, her room was quiet. The nurse greeted me with a kind smile, but delivered the news I had been dreading. My mother had passed away peacefully in her sleep. They found her that morning with a gentle smile on her face, as if she had simply drifted off in the middle of a pleasant conversation. As I walked into her empty room, it felt cold and stale, devoid of the life it once held. There, on her coffee table, sat a doll they had found in her hand. An old, worn doll, the kind a child would have carried everywhere. I stood there staring at it, unable to place it. I had never seen it among her belongings when she moved in. It was definitely from her generation. I turned and looked at her wall, which was covered with pictures, memories locked in time. Some of me, some of my children, some of my dad. My eyes stopped on an old black and white picture from the 30s. My mom was holding that doll, smiling. I picked it up from the wall, examining the picture. It was the same doll. On the back, it read in faded black pen, "Happy 6th birthday, my daughter, June 4th, 1937. I remembered a story she had told me from her childhood, how she loved that doll, and how devastated she was when it was destroyed by the dogs when she was 12. I remembered how she told me she was still upset, even tearing up as she spoke. She told me that doll was her only friend during the summers as a country girl working on a farm. Her brothers were much older, so she never had anyone to play with after the chores were done, until she got that doll when she was 6. She went on to explain the adventures she had with her imaginary friend who inhabited the doll. I could still remember the smile she had as she reminisced. A deep emptiness filled me. A part of me was gone, laid to rest with my mom. How could it be the same doll? Did one of the staff see the picture and find a similar one? This was the doll she had clung to as a child, the one she had called her friend, Belly Lynn. Yet here it was, found resting in her hands as if it had never left her side. As I stood in the room, unease returned, mingled with a deep sadness. I couldn't help but think of the old gentleman I had seen years before on my first visit, a foreshadowing of my mom's death. The way he had talked to his unseen companion, the way his room had been emptied so quickly afterward. And now my mother, with her imaginary friend from childhood, gone in much the same way. The Man and the Teacup. After the funeral, returning to the nursing home felt different. The light seemed dimmer, the air heavier, with an emptiness, a silence that wasn't there before. I collected all the memories, the pictures from the wall, her keepsakes, and took them to my car. But then I turned around, heading back inside. My mother was gone, but something still pulled at me, something unfinished. I found myself walking back down the same hallway where I had first seen the old gentleman talking to no one. I reached the room where I had seen him with the 2 teacups. The same tinkling sound of a spoon on a teacup danced from inside. The door was ajar, and though I had no reason to go inside, something compelled me to push it open. The room was exactly as I remembered it, except this time one of the teacups was next to a mug of coffee with a plate, with 1 biscotti waiting on the table, steam curling lazily from the cups, as if someone had just set them out. I stepped inside, my heart pounding in my chest. I wasn't sure what I expected to find, but as I sat down in the chair in front of the mug, I felt a presence, a cold yet oddly comforting sensation. The air around me thickened. A black mist blew across my shoulder, sending chills down my spine. It curled and drifted to the chair in front of me as a figure materialized from the shadows. For some reason, all I felt was an eerie calm. No fear from seeing a man in a black suit appear in front of me. His face was old, wrinkled and sunken, his eyes like wells of endless night, solid black, with fine strands of silver streaks spinning chaotically in them, and his smile was one of sorrow and understanding. He picked up the teacup and stirred it, making the tinkling sound. He motioned to my cup and the biscotti. "Please, your mother made it for you," he said in an old, soft voice. So I did, the taste bringing back memories of every time I visited my mom. My breath caught in my throat, a lump forming from the last memory. Biscotti and coffee that tasted as if she did make them. "Who are you?" I managed to ask, my voice shaking. "You didn't have time for her," the figure said softly, his voice barely more than a whisper. It was gentle, but each word cut through me like a blade. "As she sat getting old, you didn't come, but I did. I was her friend." The old man's smile deepened, though it held no warmth, only the gravity of something eternal. "I am death's last embrace," he said quietly. "I am the companion who sits with those who are forgotten, the friend who waits when no one else does. I come when the world grows silent, as the lights begin to dim, and I stay until the very end." The weight of his words pressed down on me. I realized that this entity had been with my mother in her final days, offering her the comfort that I couldn't. I felt a strange mix of guilt, sorrow, and gratitude. "Why?" I asked, my voice barely audible. "Why do you do this?" Figure's gaze held mine, his black eyes swirling with silver, and for a moment I saw not just an old man, but something ancient, something that had seen countless lives flicker out like candles in the wind. For their stories, their life, their friendship. I will never forget who my friends were as they depart from this dimension, he said. And when your time is near, I will be yours too, if you come to my lands. A shiver ran down my spine as I sat there, unable to move, unable to look away from those dark, knowing eyes. He took a sip from his teacup, the steam still rising in delicate spirals. This was not a place for the living, I realized. This was a room for those at the end of their journey, a final stop before the long, dark road that lay ahead. Slowly I stood, my legs trembling beneath me. Figure watched me, saying nothing more, just sitting there, patient as ever. As I backed away, the last thing I saw was that haunting smile, a smile that promised companionship, not in life, but in the final moments as death took hold. Thank you, I told him as I stood at the door's threshold. I left the room, my heart heavy with the knowledge of what awaited me, and all of us, when the time came. The nursing home seemed darker than ever, the silence now oppressive. But there was something else, too, something that had been left behind with my mother. A strange, sad comfort in knowing that when her time had come, she hadn't been alone. As I walked out of the building, I glanced back one last time, looking at the home. It faded in dark mist, eclipsing the sunset glowing behind it. It was gone now, but I knew what was waiting inside. Who was waiting inside? And when the time came, I knew I would be back.